Hi, it's Debra M. Welcome back. We're now at step 2, increasing the signals of safety and connection. The first essential tool is your staff and student safety planning tool. And with this tool, you're going to look at your environment and see how well you feel in terms of safety from inside, outside, and between. There's an example here for you to look at, and I want to be sure to make a point that when we're thinking about safety, it begins with us. And I think that's where we're going a little bit awry in schools today, is that the focus is always on the students, but we also have to feel safe from inside, outside, and between others in relationships. So this would be an activity that you could do as a small group or at a staff meeting to just kind of consider how you're feeling with the IOB formula. How's that working out for you personally in your job? And then also extend it to how your students are feeling. The environmental safety walk tool is one that I've used in the past, and it's worked really well. The example that you have is a true example, a realistic example of my daughter in her first week in high school. There were just so many challenges because she had such severe sensory issues. And this was before she had gone completely non-speaking, so she actually could communicate with us some of her needs. And as you can see, as you go through the day, it just builds. Her sense of danger is building. And then she just goes into freeze mode and she just kind of freezes and then looks like she's being stubborn because she won't go sit at lunch if she's next to somebody who has a really smelly lunch. So she would just stand there. And the people in the cafeteria would get mad at her and say, "Shalee, you need to sit down." Well, she was just, couldn't express very well what was going on. So I actually did some investigation when they told me about the situation and realized that it was the smelly food. Even at home, we have to sit seats apart. So if I have, for instance, tuna fish, she cannot stand sitting next to me and eating her food if I have tuna fish. So it's just this environmental safety walk tool, I think, is really important when you have one student that always seems dysregulated. I think to follow them through the day and talk with them about what they're sensing, the nervous system is sensing, can be a real eye-opener. And then from there, we can really create tools that work for them and interventions that work for them so that they feel safer in their daily environment. The environmental safety scale tool is designed to be used with the previous tool. After you followed a student for the day, then you can list all the signs of danger that you noticed in the first column, and then you can make a plan for how are we going to increase signals of safety for that student. So on the left-hand side, you can see with Shalia, all the signals of danger were no seatbelt, no assignment on the bus, no music, pop questions in class, students staring at her when she's hesitating to speak, unassigned lunch seat, smelly food, and also it's also visual. She also visually can't look at weird-looking food. And a messy art project that she didn't want to get her hands into, and a lot of chaos in the hallway. So some of the ways we increased her signals of safety was to make sure she has a seatbelt, assign her a seat on the bus, give her some earbuds to listen to her music, allow for prep time before questions, redirect the students who are staring at her, and discuss the best place to sit at lunchtime and the best ways to handle the smelly food, provide some gloves during the art project, and provide a hallway buddy to help her in the hallway negotiate going from one place to another. The 3 C's of safety activity is something that you can do with students, and it's a way to just confirm that you have some of the safety elements in place just generally during activities. So one of the examples here is for choice. My teacher says we can work alone, with a partner, or in small groups on this lesson. For context, I'm learning this to become a critical thinker and critical user of social media. So the context is the why. And the connection is I'm finding this lesson interesting. I'm connected to it. It has meaning and relevance for me. And I enjoy building connections with my group members. Coming up, there's going to be a video where I share a really embarrassing and I don't know, I just felt so unsafe in this situation. It was something silly. It was about an art project that I was doing with some friends on New Year's Day. But I'm not good with art, and it just turned into something that my nervous system really felt unsafe and detected a lot of cues of danger. So that's coming up, and so I won't dwell too much on this activity because you'll get a really good sense of it when I explain it in the video. The causal layered analysis tool, part 1 and part 2. This is going to be explained in a video coming up, so I won't spend a ton of time. I just want you to know that CLA and understanding our myths, our perceptions, our assumptions, worldviews, and how the system supports or limits these, and then how that creates our narrative is really powerful stuff. I used it for my doctoral dissertation when I interviewed teams. I interviewed occupational therapists and general ed teachers who collaborated together and felt their collaboration was successful. And I was trying to tease out what were those successful elements. And when I interviewed using this format, I got so much really good information. I think this is a great tool if you have a controversy on staff where you need to meet together as a group and really get all our concerns out. But instead of everybody randomly tossing out all their concerns and everybody ends up overwhelmed by it, this is a very systematic way of looking at the situation and figuring out what do we need to do to change this narrative at the top level. So in part 2, in part 1, we're going from the top down. And then in part 2, we kind of deconstruct everything and we work with a new metaphor, something that's more optimistic or something that we want to have happen. And then we see how our assumptions, perceptions, beliefs, worldviews, and all that changes as we move up. And then ultimately our narrative changes. So there's a really good video coming up where I actually do this live with a staff. And you can see how we're talking about a student. You can see how we are first unpacking those assumptions and then we are rebuilding based on a new, more hopeful metaphor. When students participate in CLA, let's call it restoring. That's a term used in the mental health profession. And I've read about it in Deb Dana's book. So I thought, you know what, I like that. I like that term. So we're going to teach them how to restore because I worked with high school students for years, and so many of them were reading at first, second, and third grade levels. And what I found is it didn't matter how much I taught them. I mean, that was part of teaching them well, but I shouldn't say it didn't matter. I mean, it mattered. But what mattered even more was their perceptions and their beliefs. Because by the time they get to high school and they're not reading, they basically think they're stupid. They basically think they can't learn and that nothing I will do will help them. So I had to unpack all of that and I had to rebuild it in a way that their belief system supported learning and improving and getting better at their literacy. So in part 1, it's the same as with causal layered analysis. You start at the top of what is their story. And then you work your way through, they write and work their way through to the base of what is their myth or their metaphor around their story. Well, what I've added in this particular activity is now they're also going to name their ANS states. So they're going to say, with this story, where are you in your nervous system? Is this a ventral story or is this a dorsal vagal story? What story is this for their nervous system? And then we're going to restore going from the bottom back up. I'm going to ask them to discover a more hopeful metaphor. What do they want to have happen in their future? And then work their way back up to the top and then check in. Does that feel more ventral? Does that feel like a more hopeful and optimistic story that they could achieve? I think that this takes some time to do with students, And I think it's really powerful. And one of the ways we could start is even with stories. We can, in literature, if we're reading a storybook or we're reading a novel, either way, we can, in our own way, do this more simply with younger children and a little more complex with older students, is we can have them go through the restoring. What happened with the character? What was the character's story? And how did they end up having a more hopeful story? How did the story end? And what happened along the way? I just feel like this is something that we shouldn't hesitate to do, and try to figure out how we can do this in a classroom with a lot of students. Could they do it in groups? Could they think about a story that generally everybody's talking about? It could be a story that's in the news that we could say, well, what is the story that we're hearing? And then, what would happen if we looked at that story differently? What would happen if we looked at it with a more hopeful metaphor? While doing my doctoral dissertation, I became acquainted with future studies, and my professor was a certified futurist, and it opened up a whole world to me. And I really loved it so much that I ended up getting certified in it. So I'm a certified futurist as well. And that means I know how to use different techniques to help people figure out what are the different scenarios that might happen in the future and what can we do today to create that future we want for ourselves tomorrow. What are those steps that we can take? And the futurist isn't about seeing into the future. We don't predict the future. We help prepare for the future by saying what can be done right now. So I wanted to bring that into this book because I think it's really important. So in this, my preferred future activity, your used future is a future that doesn't serve you anymore. Imagine your preferred future. Describe, draw, or doodle what it looks like here. And then after that, you'd say, what's one action step you can take right now to begin moving towards your preferred future? You can even try this yourself. If you're struggling with something right now and you're thinking, this future, what I have currently isn't the future I want, try filling this out. You might be surprised how it might change your perspective and your perception. And you can also do a CLA around it as well. So I think the futures studies work is really intriguing, and I'd love to see more of it in our schools.